Really troubling news from our neighbour, eSwatini. A prominent human rights lawyer and activist gunned down in his home while watching television with his family this weekend. Thulani Maseko was an outspoken government critic, and he was at the helm of a group of political parties and civic organisations calling for democracy in the kingdom. The killing has been condemned by the United Nations Human Rights Chief, Volker Turk, who is calling now for an independent probe into it. I'm joined by Mfanafuthi Tsela, who's the acting spokesperson for the Swaziland Solidarity Network. Mr. Tsela, thank you so much for joining us, and my condolences. I understand that you were close to him. This sounds like a terrible loss of a remarkable man. Could you tell us what you know about what happened on Saturday night and what makes you and others believe it was indeed an assassination?
Thank you very much, Sally, and thanks to the viewers of eNCA. In fact, we are sure. In fact, what happened is that before Thulani was assassinated, the King Mswati II was releasing the warriors or the regiments from his royal residence, and he was gloating, in fact, about the presence of the mercenaries, which SSN and other organizations have been complaining about, like saying that why do we even have to complain about the mercenaries? What is it that people have done that may have brought the mercenaries? So it was just a few hours after Thulani was killed, but we have been raising the issues about the presence of mercenaries who are both participating in the hunting down and killing of Swazis, and also who are said to be also training the Swaziland security forces. So there is no doubt that the murder of Thulani was orchestrated by the king, and maybe using his mercenaries or his hitmen in the security forces.
So we understand that he was at home with his family watching television on Saturday night, and he was fired at through the window. Nothing was taken. He was shot dead, which also looks like there was a very clear motive to end his life. He was also head of the multi-stakeholder forum, which is this group of concerned civic organizations and political parties calling for change in eSwatini. What happens to that movement now that the leader is killed?
It's a very sad moment. It's a loss not just to that movement, but to all the democracy-loving Swazis. So it's his death is not. It may be a setback, but at the same time, it's going to be an inspiration for other Swazis to even fight and to push even harder for the attainment of democracy, because it is something that he has fought for, like for a bigger part of his life. So he is like now the people have to do something in order to be able to attain what he has been looking for. So people like Thulani, they knew that the struggle was not like an easy route, because if you could remember, like a few years ago, he spent 2 years in prison just for the article which he wrote in a magazine, and the Amnesty International declared him a prisoner of conscience. And even before that, he was charged for sedition and terrorism for what he said in a funeral of one of his friends and colleagues, Musa Dlamini. So he is somebody who knew that, like, what he is doing is not like anything can happen, and it's unfortunate that he had to pay the ultimate price for the freedom that he has been fighting for most of his life.
We also know that as a human rights lawyer, he was defending two of the members of parliament in eSwatini who were accused of being part of the unrest that happened in July 2021 in your country. Of course, we had our own unrest at the same time. Just take us back to that period around July 2021. What happened on the streets of eSwatini, and what is it like today?
I think that was a turning point in the history of Swaziland, because that was a time when the Swazis, for the first time, they took things into their own hands. And the Mswati was like, he was shaken, and then he resorted to violence where over 100 Swazis were shot and killed, and hundreds were maimed. People were, they lost their limbs, and people are crippled even today. But that was when Mswati lost the support of Swazis. And from that day, I think politics in Swaziland changed. Like, for the first time, like, people were not afraid. Like, the Swazis lost the fear which they've had maybe for many years. People were not afraid, and that is why he resorted to the violent crackdown and killing of people. So, like, now, what has happened since then is that, yes, he's no longer in control of Swaziland. So the only thing he could do was to use violence and to arrest and detain, like, people who are opposed to him. Like, the two members of parliament we are talking about have been in prison for 2 years, and everybody has condemned it. The international parliamentary organizations and the regional ones have condemned the arrest. Even some in Europe have condemned their incarceration. So since then, the king has lost any support, like, amongst the Swazi people.
Very briefly, we've seen a response from the UN Human Rights Chief, we've seen a response from the European Union and from organizations within the Southern African region. What sort of stance would you like to see South Africa take on this issue?
I think it should not be business as usual, because the problem we have is that the South Africa in particular has got a very big role. We have raised the question of SSN, like in its last statement, we raised the question of the presence of mercenaries, which even Mswati acknowledged, like, on Saturday. And some of the mercenaries are like South Africans. They are like South Africans who claim to be like security or whatever they can use, but they are South Africans, and I understand that there is a law that bans, like, the participation of South Africans in conflicts in other countries. So we are expecting South Africa to act on that, but also, like, as a neighbor of Swaziland, we are expecting the government of South Africa to stop, like, this thing of, like, handling Mswati with soft gloves. We think now it is time for South Africa to take a stand. In fact, in terms of principles, because South Africa, like, even its constitution is based on the human rights. So we expect South Africa to be to be harder. And the first thing which we expect is for South Africa to sanction the king and his family, because that is the problem. The big problem is that what the king is fighting for resources. So for him, like, why he's killing Swazis is because he feels that they're threatening, like, his lavish lifestyle. So if countries like South Africa can start to sanction him, I think most of the countries in the region will follow suit.
Thank you so much for speaking to us this evening. We really do appreciate it. That was Mfanafuthi Tsela, the acting spokesperson for the Swaziland Solidarity Network, commenting on the assassination over the weekend of Thulani Maseko, human rights lawyer in eSwatini, of course, the country formerly known as Swaziland. Do stay with us.